Hello and welcome. My name is Elizabeth Janice Pearl, and I'm the Alumni Director here at UCEAP. Bryn and Elizabeth, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, everyone. My name is Bryn Lemon. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement and Scholarships in our office in Goleta.
And hi, everyone. I am Elizabeth Hopes, and I am the Scholarship and Alumni Engagement Coordinator for UCEAP.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I am honored to introduce our speaker, Dr. Peter Graham. Peter is an Associate Dean here at UCEAP. In this role, he works on academic affairs, faculty engagement, and special projects to advance the academic integration of UCEAP programs into UC curricula across the system. Peter started his distinguished academic career as an undergraduate at UCLA. He went on to earn his master's at the University of Arizona and received his PhD from Stanford. He joined the UC Riverside faculty in 2001 and is now a full professor in the Department of Philosophy and the program in linguistics. He is a world-renowned philosopher who has held fellowships and visiting appointments in Scotland, England, Germany, Canada, and Korea. At Riverside, Peter has held significant administration positions, including 5 years as Associate Dean of Student Academic Affairs for the College of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, and for 2 years as Associate Dean of Arts and Humanities. Please join me and welcome Dr. Peter Graham.
All right. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. I wasn't sure what I would talk about, so I've decided to take advantage of this opportunity to tell more people about what philosophy is. So for those of you, I guess most of you who've studied abroad, maybe you've gone to countries like in the United Kingdom where people know about philosophy because they study it in high school. The United States, that doesn't happen. Many people don't have an exposure to philosophy in high school, and so their only chance is college or the university. And even then, they're busy fulfilling other requirements, especially those for their major. So a lot of people in American culture don't know what philosophy is. Since I think it's a wonderful thing, which should come as no surprise, I'm going to take this opportunity to tell you sort of my short version of what philosophy is and why it's worth doing. So here goes, and I'll try to save plenty of time for questions, either about the presentation or about me or about my international abroad experience. So the outline, I'm going to talk about two types of philosophy. Second, I'll talk about one of those in a little more detail. It's called, or what I call, theoretical philosophy. That's the type of philosophy you would study at the university. To help you get a better handle on what philosophy is, I'll describe very briefly two methods of philosophy, and I'll present a famous argument for the existence of God to illustrate the methods. And then I'll talk about the why. I'll describe just a few benefits of philosophy as a discipline, as an intellectual pursuit, and what you might get out of studying philosophy yourself. So two types of philosophy. First, the first type comes from what the word philosophy means. So philosophy in Greek would be something like philosophia. The phileo or the philo, that means love, as in philanthropy, love of people. And the Sophie part, Sophia, means wisdom. So the literal meaning of the word, or the original meaning of the word, is love of wisdom. And the philosophers in ancient Greece in, say, 400 BCE, they were called the lovers of wisdom. That's connected to the first type of philosophy. So the first type of philosophy, which is probably more prevalent when you hear the word, when you think, what does philosophy mean, is philosophy as a way of life. You might ask someone, what's your philosophy? What are your values? What really matters to you? What important life decisions might you make? What principles guide you as you live your life, raise your children, and so on? So in ancient Greece, there are a number of different schools, that is, different groups of philosophers, lovers of wisdom, who gave different answers to the question, how should I best live my life? So you can think of Sophia as knowledge of how to live one's life. The philosophers were the lovers of knowledge of how to live one's life. There's a huge resurgence of interest in Stoicism. So Stoicism was an ancient Greek philosophical school, one of these schools that was a way of life. So if you know anything about Stoicism, about Marcus Aurelius, for example, or Seneca, then you've got a sense of what philosophy is as a way of life. But then there's something that was also invented in ancient Greece around the same time in the 4th century BCE, and this is theoretical philosophy. It grew out of one philosopher's way of trying to answer the question, how should I live my life? And it just blossomed into addressing all sorts of different types of questions. That philosopher was Plato. So Plato is, in many respects, the most important philosopher in the Western tradition because his philosophy created what we now call theoretical philosophy. And if you were to study philosophy at the university and read a little Plato, you'd see the continuity. So there are two types of philosophy. Philosophy is a way of life, and theoretical philosophy. Most of the instruction at a university will be about theoretical philosophy. And though I personally have a strong interest in philosophy as a way of life and teach it a bit in my introductory courses, I am a theoretical philosopher in the sense of Plato. Okay, those are the two types of philosophy. So what exactly is theoretical philosophy? What is it that we study at the university? So here's a very short description of it that you could put on the back of a postage stamp. It's just a series of questions where each question is taken in a very abstract and very general way, trying to answer the question in a fundamental manner. Here's the first one. What is there? What exists? This field that tries to answer this question, or the subdiscipline in philosophy, is called metaphysics and ontology. And I'll say more about metaphysics in an upcoming slide. Another question is just, what should I do? How should I live my life? Taken in the most abstract and general way, that's ethics and morality. The next question would be, what should we do? So we live our individual lives, but we live our lives in groups. We're social animals. So we can always ask, how should we live together? What is justice? What is equality? What is fairness? This would be political philosophy. And if any of you have read any Plato, you've probably read his famous work called The Republic, which is a work of both political philosophy and ethics and morality with a bunch of metaphysics and ontology in there as well. Well, if you're thinking about these questions, like, what is there? What are the types of things that exist? Or what should I do? Or what should we do? You know that people disagree. The philosophers on all of these questions have sort of mined out all of the possible answers where the answers are conflicting. So you're going to ask a philosopher or anyone when they have a differing opinion, how do you know? So when you take that question, how do you know, in its most abstract and general sense, where you're thinking about knowledge and ways of knowing in general, you're doing epistemology, logic, and reasoning. So my specialty is epistemology. I'm an epistemologist. And so I ask this question, how do you know? Or what is knowledge? Or what is evidence? What is reasoning? What is a good reason? Well, when you know something, you have a belief about the world, a representation of the world that is accurate, that is true. So the mind is somehow mirroring or representing reality as it is. That's what knowledge is. So what's going on in the mind when we're thinking about reality? So what is it to think? What is it to represent? What is it to feel? What is it to be conscious? This would be philosophy of mind. This really becomes a central question in philosophy with Descartes. So you may know the famous expression, I think, therefore I am. That is from the French philosopher Descartes in the 17th century. Then you can ask the question, what do you mean? So when we're talking to one another, when I'm expressing my view, when I think, well, we should all be vegetarians, it's wrong to eat animals when we can get all the food we need without eating animals, you might ask me, what do you mean by your words? What do you mean by it's wrong? Or what do you mean by a mammal? And if we take this in the most abstract and general way about meanings and about communication, we're now doing what's called the philosophy of language. So here are some subdisciplines of philosophy. And now you can think of theoretical philosophy, what happens at the university, as an attempt to answer these and other questions in a most abstract and general sort of way. So let me try to be a little more concrete about a couple of these areas by giving you some more examples, and then I'll turn to doing some philosophy in front of you. All right, so what are some of the central topics in metaphysics? I've mentioned some of them already. One is just the very general, what is the nature of reality? I'm at UCLA right now. If you've been to UCLA or if you've seen pictures of UCLA, you've seen Royce Hall with the two kind of spires going up. Royce Hall, named after Josiah Royce, an American philosopher, he thought all of reality was ideas, was mental. So the chair you're sitting on is not a physical thing, he thought. He thought it was a collection of ideas. So what is the nature of reality? Or what is the nature of truth? What is truth? What is time? Time goes fast and it goes slow. Or does it always go at the same pace? Or is it somehow an illusion? Is there a God? I'll talk about this in an upcoming slide. What is it to be a person? So we're persons. Are computers persons? Is an android a person? Is the newborn infant a person? What is free choice? Is it an illusion? So a big book just came out by a scientist at Stanford who says, no, it's an illusion. Is he doing good philosophy or just good science? What are numbers? So think not about the numeral 7, that we write down a particular way in an Arabic numeral or as a Roman numeral or as the English word 7 or the German word sieben. Think about what it's referring to. What are numbers? Where are they? Can you go to Scotland in the Highlands and find the number 7? What is a law of nature? This is a puzzling question. These are some examples in metaphysics. There's another one. What has changed? Is it an illusion? There's an argument I teach in my introductory course that it is an illusion and nothing ever changes. Here are some topics in the philosophy of mind. What is it? What is a mind? Can a computer have a mind? What is this funky thing called intentionality? That's our ability to think about things, even things that don't exist. How is that even possible? What is consciousness? This is such a hot topic in science, in philosophy of the last, say, 40 years. Trying to understand how the brain, which looks like the kidney, produces consciousness, or subjective awareness of the colors and shapes and smells and so on of the things around us. How does the brain do that? And what is this thing, this property, this feature that the brain is supposed to produce? And then when something happens in our brain, it causes a change in our mind. You drink too much coffee, you become jittery, your feelings change as your brain changes. How does that happen? How does our mind and our brain interact? And what about souls? What is the relationship between a soul and a mind? Are they the same thing? Are they distinct? And is it even possible to survive the destruction of our brains and bodies? Is there an afterlife? Those are some topics in those areas. So I hope those questions and kind of the way I was posing them or the tone of voice I was using was helping you think of it as a general and very abstract kind of question. And I'll be more concrete about that when I give you an example of an argument. But I want to brag a little bit about the history of philosophy. So in philosophy, if you take an intro course or an advanced course, you're going to be introduced to these questions. And you'll look at philosophers trying to answer them back and forth. And you'll get to a point where the professor has just been criticizing arguments and showing how the arguments fail and how we really don't know which view is correct. And then you'll ask, is there any knowledge in philosophy? Does philosophy make any progress? These questions are 3,000 years old. Why do we keep trying? Where does philosophy succeed? Well, in the history of philosophy, philosophy's had a lot of successes by helping people understand the questions they're trying to answer, look at possible answers to those questions, and sometimes what happens is they figure out how to answer it, and what they do is they go off and they create what we would now call a science. So metaphysics, what is there? What is time? What has changed? And so on. As you know, in UK universities, physics is still called natural philosophy. So natural philosophy is metaphysics about nature. And so much of science, of physical science, is the result of inquiry into what is there. Then when you think about political philosophy, who were the first political philosophers? Or more concretely to the point I'm making here, who were the first economists? Who were the first political scientists? Who were the first sociologists? They were all philosophers. They did philosophy and what we now call economics or what we now call political science at the same time. Adam Smith. When you read Adam Smith, you can read Adam Smith in an economics course or in a philosophy course. You can read Adam Smith in a sociology course. Epistemology and logic, that's my field, has had some important contributions into the development of science, mathematics, and computer science. There was a philosopher in Germany in the 19th century, in the 1800s, who was interested in making mathematics more rigorous. And he realized the logic of his day was not good enough to get the rigor in mathematical proof that he wanted. So he ended up discovering what we now call second-order predicate logic. He discovered it or created it, a type of logic which is the foundation of computer languages. The very first computer languages were called things like Prolog. And Prolog is just short for programming with logic. So a philosopher trying to answer a question about how we know something in a particular domain, mathematics, made a discovery which makes it possible for you and I to talk to each other on Zoom using computers. Philosophy of mind, cognitive science is it's a huge science now. If you take a cognitive science course that's called Foundations of Cognitive Science, you're going to read philosophers. If you take a course in the history of psychology, you're going to read philosophers. Philosophy of language, linguistics and communication. This is another subspecialty of mine. I teach a course that's cross-listed between philosophy and linguistics because I'm teaching the foundations of a branch of linguistics called pragmatics. So there are many areas where philosophy has made huge contributions to culture. And when you think about ideas have consequences. Think about democracy. It was John Locke, for example, in England in the 17th century, who developed a number of the ideas that served as the foundation for representative democracy. Okay, how do you do philosophy? How do you do it? I find that even my students, after completing the introductory to philosophy class or 4 or 5 courses in philosophy, still aren't sure how to do it. It's sort of like watching someone play basketball and never having a chance to play it yourself. You need to play it yourself in order to learn how to do it. So I'll describe a little bit, and maybe you can do this along with me. We'll do a little bit of philosophy. So one thing that you do in philosophy is you try to understand the concepts involved in your questions. So what is a number? What is time? What is truth? So these concepts, time, truth, justice, morality, and so on, we try to understand those concepts. This can be challenging. So I'll start with something very easy. Chair. Take the concept chair. This is not one of these really abstract and general concepts that philosophers are interested in, but it's a concrete concept. You've all got the concept. And if I were to ask you, define the concept chair, and define it in the following way. Something is a chair if and only if it has the following properties. And when you list those properties, you can't use a synonym for chair. So something is a chair if and only if. When I ask students, many of them will say, well, it's something with a seat and 4 legs and a back made of wood. Now, that is true that many chairs have those properties, but that's not what it is to be a chair. You haven't really defined the concept of a chair. This is a little bit tricky. I'll just take you to the conclusion. A chair is a piece of furniture meant for one person to sit. Does it have to have a back? Is a stool a chair? This is where we're going to disagree. About 1/3 of you are going to say a stool is not a chair, and 2/3 will say, yeah, it's a chair. So that's not a particularly philosophical concept, but you can see how a first pass attempt at defining something like, well, it's something with 4 legs made of wood with a seat. There are just too many chairs without 4 legs that aren't made of wood, but they all have a seat except for the broken ones. All right, here's another concept, and this one's easy enough too, bachelor. What is a bachelor? Right? Well, a bachelor, you might say, is an unmarried male. Is that really what it is to be a bachelor? The Pope is unmarried and a male. Is the Pope a bachelor? Or you may think, well, no, the Pope is not a bachelor. You have to be eligible to be married, and the Pope is not eligible to be married. So maybe we need to add that feature. So by thinking starting with a kind of initial understanding of some examples of chairs or bachelors, and then asking more questions, we can get to a kind of deeper or more accurate understanding of a concept, right? So those are not terribly philosophical concepts, but here's one that philosophers are interested in: God. So what is your concept of God? Different people are going to have different concepts. They're going to answer this question in different ways. But here's the God of the philosophers. When philosophers have thought about God in the Western tradition over a couple thousand years, there's a broad consensus that God is the most perfect being, whatever God is, or God is the greatest conceivable being. More concretely, this means things like God is all powerful, or God is all knowing, God is all present, God is all good. God has everything that would make a being better or more perfect. God, in fact, has all the perfections. So that's a conception of God that you find within philosophy. So a lot of what philosophers try to do is try to understand concepts, and all those questions I asked, they'll go at them, trying to understand them. And it turns out it can be very difficult, and there'll be disagreement in understandings of concepts. And sometimes it takes generations to come to a consensus about the nature of a concept. It took mathematicians hundreds of years to get a consensus on the concept of number, and there's still debate about what our concept is about. What are the things that are numbers? So that's one method, trying to understand concepts, and the other one is argumentation. So if you remember high school geometry, where you did proofs, that's what we do in philosophy. We're doing proof after proof after proof, a structural argument, premise, 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 conclusion. It just turns out in philosophy, there are very few of these really interesting proofs that stick, that people think are effective. Whereas in mathematics, at least in geometry, there's thousands of good, effective proofs. So there's a difference between mathematics and philosophy. So in philosophy, we do arguments. So here's an example. Most Americans say you can neither prove nor disprove the existence of God. Maybe that's true, but when I ask them, how do you know that? I don't ask them that. But if I were to ask them that, they might say, well, I don't know. I've never thought about it. Philosophers have been thinking about this for a very long time. So here's a famous argument from an English philosopher, Anselm. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury in the 11th century. It's called the ontological argument. So the first premise is this. It starts with our understanding of the concept of God. God, by definition, that is, if you've understood the concept of God, that's the greatest conceivable being. Well, next premise. Either God exists in the mind alone, that'd be the atheist position, or in reality as well, that's the theist position. Those are the possibilities. Third premise. If God existed in the mind alone, if that's where God was, then couldn't we conceive of an even greater being, a being that exists in reality as well? Right? If God's just in the mind, how great is that? So you could certainly conceive of something that's greater than that, something that existed in reality as well. It's the third premise. But the fourth premise says that's impossible. You can't conceive of anything greater than the greatest conceivable being. God, by definition, is the greatest conceivable being. We know that from understanding our concepts. Premise 2, we know the options. Either God's in the mind alone or in reality as well. Premise 3, we know what it is to conceive things and what it is to conceive something greater. And if God's in the mind alone, then we can think of something greater. But you can't think of anything greater than the greatest conceivable being. So God does not exist in the mind alone. So God exists in reality. Philosophers will go through argument after argument, addressing their questions in those different domains of theoretical philosophy, using their understanding of concepts and their ability to reason through arguments. This argument, you might imagine, has some problems. As I said, many arguments, if not all the famous ones in the history of philosophy, there's something that's not quite working. And so if we were to continue this as a seminar, we would go through and discuss each of the steps and try to see how we might object or find a mistake. In so doing, we'd be improving our ability to reason and hopefully getting a deeper understanding of the subject matter, the nature of the mind, the nature of concepts, the nature of existence, and the nature of God. Okay, let me conclude with why. Why do philosophy? Well, I've already given examples about culture. We should all be grateful that there have been philosophers. We live in a democracy. Many people live through communism. And you might debate, was that really the type of communism that the philosopher and economist Marx, for example, had in mind? But we've certainly benefited in many ways in our political and social lives. We benefit from having computers. We benefit from having an understanding of the mind. We have benefits in a variety of areas because of the discoveries made by philosophers. But if you study philosophy, you will learn a type of critical thinking. So in all the courses you take in high school and college, we're trying to improve your ability to think. Physics will say we teach students critical thinking, but they teach critical thinking of a particular kind. Or my friends in English say, we teach critical thinking. And I'm like, yeah, you teach people how to critique in particular ways. So in philosophy, you learn a type of critical thinking, and it's a very valuable type of critical thinking. One thing that's very valuable about it is getting really comfortable thinking through both sides of a topic. Some of you, when I talked about God, might have thought, were you under attack? Or were others cheering along thinking, oh yes, all of that reasoning must be exactly right? Did you have a kind of an emotional investment in it? That emotional investment actually makes reasoning through both sides of a question difficult. Philosophers get really good at reasoning through both sides, and so they get better in many ways at discovering the truth. That's one type of critical thinking that they get. Another thing about doing philosophy, a friend of mine mentioned this to me recently, he says, well, whatever you do, whether it's chemistry or whether it's managing a group of people or whether it's investing your own money or whether it's being a parent, whatever you do, studying philosophy will help you do that better. You'll be able to think through what you're doing, think reflectively about what you're doing, be open to criticism or open to another point of view. And as a result, whatever you do, you will do it better if you do it with some philosophy. Some people worry about jobs. So many of us, we've got kids or we advise students, and they're all concerned about their careers, which they should be. We have responsibilities to ourselves and to others. We need to put bread on the table. One thing that's interesting about philosophy in the United States is there aren't a lot of jobs that advertise for philosophers, but there might be lots of jobs that advertise for people with a business degree or an accounting degree or an engineering degree. People with degrees in the professions are often first to be hired. But if you look at the data of the last, say, 40 years, at least in the United States, about careers and salaries over a lifetime tied to what you majored in as an undergraduate, it's the philosopher who's first to be promoted. Philosophers go into management positions, they go into leadership positions, and their incomes continue to grow after they've mastered that particular domain where they're working, whether it's working in an investment bank, working at a university, working at a car company. They're often first to be promoted. And you might ask yourself, why? Well, it goes to the type of critical thinking, your ability to think things through, imagine possibilities way outside of the box, understand the questions clearly, look at arguments on both sides without getting committed to one side or the other before you've got all the information on the table. That's an extremely valuable skill that philosophical thinking can provide. Some people love it. Some people love philosophy, so it's the pleasure of the life of the mind. Some people don't. Some people dislike it. That's just fine, but that's certainly one of the benefits. And if you do some philosophy, lo and behold, just doing theoretical philosophy, pursuing a question for its own sake, you might discover something which is the next great discovery that makes an advance in human knowledge and human civilization. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I agree with Vivian's comments. That was very accessible for someone I don't know a lot about philosophy, and I feel like that was a great overview. Um, Questions? Anyone have a question? You can raise your hand or you can pop it in the chat. Julie, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, sure. Uh, hey, Peter, thanks for that. Philosophy is something I was really interested in as an undergrad because I had an amazing professor. So it sounds like you are also an amazing professor. So I hope your students appreciate you. I wanted to ask you something about artificial intelligence. So one of the things that we hear about a lot are the importance of the philosophers encouraging how data is fed into AI models. And they talk a lot about the trolley problem, right?
Mhm.
So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts that you could share with the group on this, like from a philosopher's perspective. How do you feel about AI? What are your cautionary tales? What do you think is the right way forward?
Okay, great question. I'll start by saying I don't have an answer to that question. So that question is a great question, an important question, kind of about the ethics of artificial intelligence. You know, what safeguards should we have? What information should we provide to it? And that is something I have not been thinking about. I have a colleague Eric Schwitzgable, who thinks about a related question that's pretty cool, which is if an artificial intelligence, a suitably complicated one, is conscious, should we treat AI the same way we treat other living beings? And how do we know whether they're conscious or not? And so suppose we don't know whether they're conscious or not. Should we assume that they are? He's actually gone to Congress to talk about that question, which is very cool. Let me just out of interest, tell everyone a famous thought experiment about artificial intelligence, which is designed to show that artificial intelligence is, in a sense, impossible. So we know it's possible. We have AI, you know, we've got ChatGPT. The question is, could an AI be conscious in the sense that my friend is interested in discovering? Could an AI really understand something? When you're talking to an AI, are you talking to a person, to a mind? My husband sometimes gets very excited when there's, you know, news on the internet that they can be conscious. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. And here's why. Here's the thought experiment. This is from a Berkeley philosopher, John Searle. It goes back to the 60s. He says, imagine you've been hired to sit in a room, it's not a dark room, but it's just a room, nothing much is going on. But there's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of books on the shelf. And you open up a book and you'll see on the left-hand column, there's some marks or squiggles or characters you don't understand, you don't know what they are. And then on the left-hand side of the book, you know, there's an arrow from the left to the right. There's more of these marks and so on. And you're told that you're just going to sit in the room, and whenever a piece of paper comes in through a slide in the door, you're going to read the marks. And then your job is to find in those books exactly those same marks or characters or squiggles on the left-hand side, and then write down what's on the right-hand side, and then push it out through the door. And you do this over and over again. Now, here's what you don't know. The person outside who's writing down on the piece of paper is a Chinese speaker, a fluent speaker of Chinese, and is writing down things in Chinese and pushing them into you. And so all the marks and characters and squiggles and so on that you don't understand, that's Mandarin Chinese. So when you match the left-hand side with the paper they've put in, and then you copy down the characters on the right side and you push them out, you're pushing out Mandarin Chinese. And the person outside the room thinks they're having a conversation with someone who is a fluent understander, a fluent speaker of Chinese. But you're in the room and you don't understand a word of this. So you are an artificial intelligence in the sense that you're able to take inputs and produce outputs that simulate understanding, but you've just mastered what's called a big lookup table. So Searle thought this showed that computers and artificial intelligence can simulate or mimic intelligence without having the type of understanding that humans have. So that's a type of method in philosophy, another method I didn't mention, which is the method of thought experiments. And then let me just, one shout out, the trolley problem. I hope you've all learned or heard about the trolley problem. There was that famous series in The Good Place where you could see the trolley problem illustrated in a variety of ways. I'm now standing in the hallway of the philosophy department at UCLA, using my friend's office. And I think his office is the office that Philippa Foot used to have. Philippa Foot was a philosopher at both Oxford and UCLA who created the trolley problem thought experiment.
Thank you, Peter. That was fascinating. We have another question from Eddie in the chat, which says, philosophy is very theoretical. How do you address the counter argument that there isn't a practical application other than teaching?
Yeah, good question. So the practical application of a philosophy degree is that you'll get hired to teach. So that's a pretty clear practical application. There are many other practical applications. That is, the skill set that you acquire helps you in your sort of work life. So I have found that being a philosopher has been extremely valuable in my administrative roles. In particular. So Associate Dean for Student Academic Affairs, Associate Dean for Arts and Humanities, now Associate Dean for, I guess I don't have a title, I'm just Associate Dean for UCEAP, right? I find that having the ability to understand concepts, to ask questions about what people mean, to think through the sort of the structure of an issue, to see whether an argument is being replied to or not, has proven very valuable. I'm actually reading through all the documents on summer physics that went through the Committee on International Education, and I'm seeing, oh, this was argued poorly. Here's an objection that wasn't answered. We're saying they don't have any evidence, say, but where's the burden of proof? Who needs to provide the evidence? I just see people getting emotional on both sides thinking they're right. That is no way to come to an understanding of what the truth is from which you can then persuade other people to your point of view. So it's that type of skill set that I think is very practical. I've also learned how to write in a particular way, which being able to write well in that way is very valuable and practical. It's an important skill set. There are also some jobs. I said there are no jobs that say we're looking for a philosopher. That's not true. There are some jobs outside of teaching philosophy, in particular jobs in what gets called applied ontology. So there are organizations like Google and other tech companies that are looking for philosophers that have a skill set in the field of metaphysics, that the part of metaphysics called ontology, with certain reasoning types of skills. So that's a place where at Riverside, we're going to create a minor that's going to help, we hope, help students get jobs with that on their certificates. I should just also add, in the 60s, it's not true anymore. In the 60s, if you had a PhD in philosophy, you're the one who got hired to program computers because you had the logic, which was the programming language. So one of my professors, when I was an undergraduate here at UCLA, who's gone, his name was Keith Donnellan, and he first taught after getting his PhD. He taught at MIT. He made more money programming than he did, for just startup companies than he did teaching. There's just been so many advances in computer science and in computer languages that's not something you can't master that spending all your time doing philosophy. You've got to spend all your time doing computer science now.
I would never have possibly conceived of a link between computer science and philosophy, so that's a really fascinating connection point. I was intrigued by a comment you made earlier, which is change is an illusion, nothing ever changes. And you said that this was a concept you've explored with a lot of your students. Is there a way to kind of briefly surmise the founding principle of that, or how you go about explaining that to them?
Yeah, so this is an example of an argument in philosophy, and there's a simple version of the argument that's probably the very first argument, a philosophical argument. It comes from a philosopher named Parmenides, who wrote it up as a poem, but then other philosophers got really interested in replying to it. So you may know about Zeno's paradoxes. Okay, so Zeno was a follower of Parmenides and tried another strategy to convince people that change and motion, they're illusions. Here's the way Parmenides did it, though. He said, for something to change, it must become what it is not. Right? So if you've got a ball and it's red, for it to become green, it has to become not red. Right? Then that's what it is to change. So just think about the concept of change. To change is to become what is not. But then think about what is not. Well, what is not? What is not is nothing. What is not is not. So how could anything become what is not if there is no what is not? So nothing can change.
Can I ask? Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, finish your answer.
Well, so I was going to say there are parallel arguments for something to change, it must become where it is not, or something to move, it must become where it is not. But what is not, so nothing can become or move. So nothing changes, nothing moves. There's similar arguments for nothing can be created. To be created, you must come from nothing, but there is no nothing. To be destroyed, you must become nothing, but there is no nothing. So everything is uncreated, indestructible, unchanging, unmoving, eternal, the eternal one. That was Parmenides' argument.
Thank you for your lecture. I enjoyed it. One of my undergraduate degrees is in philosophy. So I have a little bit of a bias. I want your opinion about how the current cult of untruth has come to be.
Oh, yeah. So that's largely a sociological question, or a question for a good social scientist, but there's always been propaganda. So there's always been an effort to persuade people of things that you want them to believe, even though you know that they're not true. And I think a couple factors, here I'm just repeating things that I've read that I found persuasive. One is the growing, the extreme partisanship in the country. So, after World War II, Republicans and Democrats loved each other, so to speak. There was not a reason to dislike or hate another person. And that kind of political polarization has just increased and increased over time. And then there's been the explosion of the internet, or sort of internet 2.0 and social media and so on, which are kind of viral platforms for making you addicted, craving to hear that your side is right and the other side is wrong, which increases a greater polarization and then a greater passion for things that are not supported by the evidence. Rather, it's just things you want to believe.
Right.
A deep factor in human psychology behind this. So that's not about, what's happened since World War II or what's going on with this technology, but a kind of a deep human thing in our minds that it's connecting to, which is partly why you want to study philosophy. So I'll connect, benefits of philosophy with this other feature that drives this passion for the untrue, is just confirmation bias, or what could be called my side bias. Right. So my side bias is you're more willing to believe evidence that supports what you already think is true. And it's difficult for people to start looking for counter evidence. So if you and I got in a disagreement and we're on Zoom, you'd be typing into your computer, why am I right? Not why am I wrong? So why is my side of this issue correct? And you find all this evidence and you think, aha, I'm right. That's a fact of human psychology that we do that. So why do we do that? There are interesting explanations of why we do that. But one way to try to overcome it, because we know it's a bias that takes us away from the truth, is to learn to put truth first. And to think that when you learn that you're mistaken about something, that makes you better, because then you're closer to the truth. So that ideal of trying to fight against the my side bias, the confirmation bias, is in a way the ideal of philosophy, right? So you remember reading Socrates, right? Socrates would have said, when you get into disagreement with someone, you're better off if you lose. You're
Mhm.
better that you lose because you've learned something. If you win, you don't learn anything. You just have the same view you've always had. But if you lose on the evidence, then you change your mind and then you're the winner because then you're onto the truth and you've improved yourself.
Well, I've learned from just taking my little Duolingo course on Spanish. Whenever I get something wrong, this little cartoon pops up and reminds me that I'm still learning, even though I got it wrong.
Yeah.
And I think we need to teach that more widely.
Oh, yeah.
And there is so much disinformation on the internet. You mentioned that. My brother, who still believes that the Trump actually won in 2020, gets all his information from the internet and considers the Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and the Washington Post all propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to believe that anybody could believe that, but they do. And it's a very frightening time in this country right now because there are
Indeed.
so many people like that. And I don't know how I'm going to survive through November 7th.
I know how you feel.
You know, we can all kiss our little butts goodbye if that happens.
Any other questions? Anyone want to
Thank you,
raise
by
their
the way.
hand?
Oh,
Thank
my
you.
pleasure.
Raise your hand or unmute yourself or put something in chat. Well, if not, oh, yep, go ahead, Peter.
Let me just say thanks to John for posting the remark about the LSAT. And actually, it's not just the LSAT, but it's other some other exams. So for like business school, so that's the GMAT, the graduate management admissions test. Philosophy majors score higher than business majors. So I don't know how good that evidence is, but if you want to go into business, major in philosophy. And if you want to be a lawyer, major in philosophy. The type of reasoning you do is not the same type of reasoning you do in many of your political science courses. So the majority of Americans who want to go to law school major in political science, but the better preparation is philosophy for the type of reasoning in law. So thanks for adding that. It's a pitch you can make. It was interesting when I was worried when I was going to tell my parents. I started as a psych major, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll be a counseling psychologist maybe. But I did debate in high school, and I did it in college too. So learning to argue. So that helped me in philosophy actually, and philosophy probably helped me in debate. But what was I going to tell my dad? So I told him, oh, philosophy, they'd score the highest on the LSAT, and they're like, oh, great, you'll be a lawyer. It took me years to realize there was no pressure from my parents. There was no pressure for me to be a lawyer or a psychologist. It's just do what I enjoy doing that would put bread on the table. And it was pressure from the culture. Why do philosophy? What are you going to do with that? Right? That's enormous pressure. And that's partly why I gave this pitch, to help people understand what philosophy is and why it's really worthwhile. It makes a difference in all of our lives.
How many students these days are majoring in philosophy at the UCs?
That's a great question. I'd say, well, like at Riverside, there's about 150 majors. San Diego probably has about 250. It's a bigger one. I think actually UCLA is probably pretty big by philosophy standards. Now at Edinburgh, there's like 850 majors, and they probably have about 25,000 undergraduates. And so you see the cultural difference.
Mhm.
So in the UK, you know about philosophy in high school. You can get a master's degree and then go teach it. The same in Canada, the same in Germany, the same in Italy. So philosophy is much more part of the culture in those countries than it is in the United States. So in high school, they know about it. And so they'll go and do it in college. Cognitive science is this major that's sort of developed out of philosophy. It was philosophy departments that first started doing cognitive science majors. Now it's mostly psychology departments, if they're going to sponsor one, or they're on their own. So San Diego, UCSD, has the largest cognitive science major in the world. They have about 2,300 majors.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
That's
that's a
fascinating.
fascinating point. I was curious about that generally with this trend in the US towards, very practical majors that are profitable and the kind of death of this practice as a whole. So it's disheartening to hear that that might be more of the trend in the US, but it is something that I did witness abroad, that there is much more of a focus on the critical thinking patterns of your actual study rather than just the merit-based system of receiving your grades.
Yeah. Yeah, so this goes back to Julie's question, thinking about AI. I've meant to develop this lecture with a new type of title called Philosophies of the Future. And so why would I say that? Well, with developing technologies like AI, jobs are going to keep changing, and they're going to change faster. So maybe 50 years ago, you'd have one career for a lifetime, or two careers. You change your job once. Now you change your job 5 or 6 times. Some jobs won't exist anymore that we're training they're majoring in today. Those jobs might not exist in 5 years, 15 years, 25 years. So you want to get as much of a basis, of a skill set that you can take from job to job. Since we don't know what the jobs are going to be, train for the skill set. And what's that type of skill set? What's the type of majors that do that more broadly? Philosophy is a very good example of that. So if you don't know what the jobs in the future are going to be, plan for that. If you do know what they're going to be, plan for that. The problem is we don't know that anymore the way we did maybe 30 or 40 years ago.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. I think everyone is nodding in agreement that this was a really wonderful way to spend our lunch and thinking a little bit more than we normally do during our lunchtime. I know I am. And I think you should, if you haven't already, do a TED talk on the value of philosophy for, high schoolers to see. I have 2 high schoolers myself, and I've never thought about that as a major, but wow, I think that is a good opportunity. So thank you, everyone. We will send out the recording if you have registered, and then we will also have Peter's information available if you want to follow up with any questions.
So
So
thank you, everybody. Thanks very much for coming. Thanks for your questions. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Peter. This was fascinating. Nice to see everyone here. I hope you all have a lovely day.
thank you.
Thank you.